One of the rabbis here at Restoration, and throughout this year, in between sermon series, we're going to do some interviews that I record on Zoom with some of my friends, and it's simply called Rabbi Matt and Friends. It even has its own logo. And there's the first interview where I thought made the most sense to start is with my parents, Rabbi David and Helene Rosenberg, about their story and our story. And rather than fly people into Seattle and go through all of that, we figured we can record them on Zoom and share with both the congregation live in Seattle on Saturday morning and also through the Restoration app and Facebook and YouTube to hear stories of some really incredible people. So I hope you enjoy this first in many that will happen throughout the year of the Happy Rabbi and Friends with David and Helene Rosenberg.
And Gary Van Landingham said this to me. Why are you afraid of knowing God? And I said, well, I met him once and it didn't work out.
And then
So
you
I'm
started crying.
I started crying and I said, I'm kind of like waiting for things to work out.
You know, in Catholicism, Jesus is right there on the cross. And I said, I need you to get out of my life. You only give me trouble.
How could there still be a thing called Christians without any who say our church goes back to this 2nd century, 3rd century, 1st century? And I said, why isn't there a synagogue that goes back to the 1st century, follows Yeshua? And that was the beginning of the seed that said, wait a minute, we're it.
My mother said, the boys are going to be confused. They're not going to know who they are because you either have to be Jewish or you have to be a Christian. They're going to be confused. And I said, no, the confusion is out there in the world.
Welcome to the first episode of the Happy Rabbi and Friends. And today I'm interviewing, my first friends, my parents, David and Helene Rosenberg in New York. It's a lot of books you got behind you there.
Some of them.
You must be a rabbi.
I don't know, some of them.
How many have you read?
I couldn't tell you.
There's a difference between how many he read and how many I read.
Yes, and how many has mom read to you? That's the question.
We have a symbiotic relationship when it comes to education. She's my muse.
Yeah. Okay, so let's kind of start from the beginning with you guys grew up in Passaic, New Jersey,
Mm-hmm.
but you didn't know each other as kids, right? But you both grew up there your whole lives.
We lived on the opposite side of town.
Oh, like the opposite side of tracks kind of thing?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
But we were often in the same place, quite often in our childhood without realizing, like the Clifton Pool.
Yeah, Passaic is 1 mile square. So we did run into each other without knowing it. But he lived on one side of the track, so to speak, and on the other.
Yeah, so one time your mom said to her best friend, do you realize our husbands could be here at the Clifton Pool?
Mm-hmm.
And I probably was there.
Peeing in the pool.
Yeah, well, whatever.
No, I don't think.
Acting like a teenager.
Yeah.
That's funny. You remember having that conversation, Mom?
Yeah.
And I was there.
Wasn't it also did both of your grandparents own delis? Were they in Passaic?
Well, my grandfather Rosenberg, Morris and Bessie, had a deli in downtown Passaic. Mm-hmm. The story is that I'll let your mom tell it. That she went to the school that was around the corner from my grandparents' kosher deli.
Yeah. So when I was in 8th grade, I had a Jewish art teacher, and she sent me almost every day to get a sandwich from his grandparents' deli, which was down the street from the school.
For her?
For her. Yes, those are different days.
Yeah,
She sent you to the deli to get her lunch?
Yeah.
and it was so she saw my grandmother and grandfather every day
Well, see, in those days, kids went home for lunch. So
in grammar school.
I would get the sandwich for her and then go home and get my own lunch. Yeah.
Wow. But that was
Grossman.
owned by the Rosenbergs.
Yeah, of course, I didn't know that, but I met them years later.
Right?
And they were not too happy to meet me.
Oh, the Rosenbergs were.
No, they weren't.
No, they weren't.
They weren't.
My grandmother was.
Yeah. So, Dad, you grew up in a conservative Jewish family.
Yeah.
Mom was an Italian Roman Catholic family.
Yes.
We actually were very similar because I went to synagogue all the time, and she went to church all the time. So we both were involved in our traditions, pretty committed to it.
From birth. Yeah.
Yeah. My mom and dad sang in the choir, and so we were an integral part of the synagogue. In fact, my earliest childhood memory that I can remember is a picture of chair legs in front of me like this. I must be crawling on the floor because I'm looking across at their feet, and I see men's and women's patent leather shoes, and I see chair legs. And so this was like the choir loft in the synagogue in Passaic, downtown Passaic. But that snapshot has a audio memory, because when I see that picture, it makes me cry, because I hear voluminous music like Yerushalayim Shel Zachav with all the voices in the synagogue, and it felt like water being poured out like a waterfall out of the choir loft, which in the synagogues in those days, the choir loft was in the back of the synagogue, and they would design it so that the sound would go out and reflect off of the round ceilings, and fill. So it really was like a waterfall of sound.
And then on the other side of town, at the same time, I was in a little Italian Catholic church where I was being shushed the entire time.
It sounds like West Side Story.
I wanted to
Helene, I just met a girl named Helene.
So you guys didn't actually meet each other or know each other until when?
My junior year.
Yeah, 1970. I graduated in June.
But we met prior to that, your graduation. We met in the library.
Right.
And I can't tell you what I was doing in the library. It wouldn't be edifying.
Well, the day that I first noticed him was we had tables that went down the middle of the library, and
big
long wooden tables, and she had this big stick, and she that when anybody talked. So I heard her say, "Rosenberg, get out of the library," and she was banging on the desk. And I turned and I saw him walking, because what he was doing was sneezing on purpose and saying
swear words
in the sneezes. Right. While he was just, being lovely. And then I got up to sign the book, which he had to do to leave. And he looked over my shoulder and he asked me what my name was. And then he started following me everywhere I went.
And hasn't stopped since.
I was following her this morning.
So then, so that's when we first noticed each other. And then graduation came for me.
Wait a minute, hold it. The next thing we did after that was went to Freud's birthday party in the Psych Club. True. So we met in a library. And it seems like the same day to me, that we both went to the Psych Club. And of course, she was my partner and it was called somatosensory stimulation was the topic. And so I had to, I still remember Mrs. Ellison, our teacher, saying, okay, David, now you stand behind Helene, and Helene, this is a test of trust. So don't bend your body, fall straight back. You have to trust that David will catch you. And I said, okay. And so she fell backwards into my arms and I picked her up, and that was pretty much it for me.
That was another kind of stimulation.
No, it was just,
And I wanted,
it was love it. It was something happened to me when I held
and I
her in
wanted
my
him to
arms.
leave me alone. That was, so he followed me everywhere I went. He came in,
That might be the biggest failure of your life.
yeah. He came into I was working in a dress shop, and he would come into the dress shop, and he almost got me fired.
Yeah.
He was always there. I went to play racquetball with my friends, and he would be there, and he just followed me everywhere. And then one day, it was Rosh Hashanah. He came to my house, and I remember he had this little brown suit on, and he was adorable.
We have a picture of that brown suit.
Yeah.
In the other room.
And I said to him, I don't want you to come to my house. I don't want you to follow me. I want you to leave me alone. And his face was so sad.
Happy New Year.
Right. Well, I didn't really know. I didn't know it was Rosh Hashanah. So he started.
No, she was tormented.
He had this face that I was up all night.
She was tormented by the pain in my face.
I couldn't believe the pain in his face. It was horrible.
I couldn't even reproduce it.
So
it was the picture of utter loss and grief. And I did not call her for a week. I didn't. And I went
to visit your brother.
I went to visit my brother for a week, and I didn't call her.
So I started getting nervous. I went to my sisters and I said, I'm never going to see him again. I don't know what to do. And she said, well, call him. So I called, and his mother told me he was at Temple University, and she would let him know I called. And he called, and I said, come home. And that was
I did.
the end. That was the
beginning of our relationship. Of course, my mother kept her on the phone for 3 hours.
Yeah, she told me everything that you could imagine.
Told her everything, including about the rash that she had when I was born, and the rash that I had when I was born.
Yeah, it was unbelievable.
And your families were not thrilled by this relationship?
No.
My mother's family was downright nasty about it.
Because
I wasn't Jewish.
Yeah, because it was just came down to the fact that she wasn't Jewish.
In the beginning, it was rough.
And the Italian side was not thrilled also?
Well, what happened was the day we left New Jersey, we got in her 1970 Dodge Dart with our cat, Fritz, the cat. And it was me, her, Fritz, and my Siddur. So I had it on the dash, my Siddur. And just before we got in the car, she said, we better get going. And I said, well, I was waiting for your family. Aren't they coming down? She said, they're not coming to see you. They're coming to kill you. I said, oh, well, in that case, let's go. So we got in the car.
Well, they were more upset. They weren't upset that he was Jewish. At least they didn't say that.
They were upset that I wasn't Italian.
But why were you leaving New Jersey?
Because he was going to school.
Yeah, I was in
Oregon.
I was going to school at Central Oregon Community College in Bend, Oregon. And we decided that there was no point in being that far apart. And it was costing us, like in those days, $200 a month on the phone bills.
Long distance, yeah.
And, so we decided that she would just come out. So I hitchhiked through the pass in Portland to the airport in the snow. And got on a plane, flew back to New Jersey, and showed up at her house. And we got in the car and we drove to Oregon.
Yeah, I think I heard that part. You were already in Oregon. You went back to get her.
Yep.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So I quit my job. I was working in the hospital and newborn nursery, thinking that I would get a job as soon as I got to Oregon. But the Oregonians were not happy that a New Yorker was coming to look for a job.
Is that also when, tell us about the time you told Jesus to get out of your life?
Oh, that was just before we left. See, when we left, we made this deal. We went like this: never going to talk about God again. And
that's like a literal thing.
Yeah. Before we left, I had this horrific knee injury where they had to operate, pretty much ended my wrestling career. What happened to me at that moment was as profound a moment in my life as I can remember. I was in the hospital coming out of surgery. I was out of surgery. There was a lot of medication. And I saw my brother at the end of the bed sharing the Lord with my cousin, Stephen. And I got angry and I cursed him out and told him to get the blankety blank out of my room. And I went to the same Black Pentecostal church that he became a believer in. And I had already come to believe it. It bore witness to me in my bed at the hospital. I said, forgive me for this, but I said, I don't know who the hell Jesus is, but God changed my brother's life. There's no doubt about it. And I went to see your mom. And the little black lady said to me, because I guess they must have known we were involved in sin, right? And she said to me, you go tell that Jezebel, you lay hands on her, you say, out Jezebel. I didn't know who Jezebel was. I didn't know what laying on hands meant.
But I knew who Jezebel.
Yeah, she knew who it was. So I came home and I said, I went like this. I went, out Jezebel. And that's the only time we ever broke up since we met. And she went and told her mother because she was so upset. And what did your mother tell you?
My mother said, Jesus is knocking at your door. My mother said that. Could you imagine? So anyway, I was going to Catholic nursing school at the time. And
makes me
I was very upset. And I went into the chapel. And I remember the cross being huge. In Catholicism, Jesus is right there on the cross. And I said, I need you to get out of my life. You only give me trouble. So what happens is I ran to the park and they're having a Jesus festival.
Jesus
so
70.
I felt like Snow White in that scene where she's like going like this, because everybody was handing me a track or giving me a Jesus button, or
there were 10,000 believers Jesus? In Central
And I thought,
Park.
I can't get away from, so I run back to school and I get into the school and they were over the intercom, there was a priest who was giving a sermon and every other word was Jesus, Jesus. And I was like, sheesh. I couldn't take it. So so that's why we decided when we got back together, that pact that we made to not talk about it anymore.
And then we just said, you know what? Our lives are better without God in it. Mm-hmm. So we kind of said, let's just not talk about this.
So we went to Oregon and we ended up in kind of like a hippie house. It was an old craftsman house, which I love to this day. It was divided up into little apartments. And
it was on Lava Road in Bend, Oregon.
Yeah, it was beautiful. Bend was beautiful. We were away from our families. We were going to college. And it was just a beautiful time together. But every place we went, somebody was telling us about Jesus. We were going to college and our psychology professor, who we didn't know at the time was a believer, and he had us come into the office and he said to your dad, you either marry this girl or let her go home. And we decided that we were going to get married. So we were trying to find somebody who would do it for nothing because
And
we
all the
had no
professors
money.
let her come to class with me.
Yeah, I was not enrolled, but they let me come. So I did his homework for him.
We had to look like we were 15 years old.
The only way he made it through.
I should have had 2 degrees, but that's
should
so we decided we're going to get married.
Those are actually all your books behind you.
Right, exactly.
No, other.
So one of college buddies who was a believer invited us to a coffee house.
And we said,
and
is
the
there
only
food?
reason why we went was because there was food. So we went,
We were
and
hungry.
there were all these people that are exactly the same age as us, who were all in their early 20s, and we didn't know we were the only non-believers in the place. And Brother Abbott was the person who was the overseer, and they had a special guest speaker who was
Pastor Gary Van Landingham.
Yeah, he was from
the Medford Foursquare Church.
Yeah. So the pastor is, preaching his heart out, and I said to him, "We got to go. We got to leave." And he said, "Well, he felt too embarrassed."
I said, "Look, they
go,
sang to
fed
us. They
us.
sang with us. They had their hands up, and
right.
and they were singing songs, and they gave us food. And
He said, "We got to wait to the end.
You can't just walk out on them."
So then,
Gary
asked, "Was there anyone in the room who didn't know Jesus?" And of course, we were the only 2 there.
Well, there's a woman, Daisy, stands up.
Oh, yeah.
Before we get a chance to leave, she stands up, and this is what she says: "I just know that there are people here who don't know Jesus, and I want them to turn their hearts over to God right now. Just stand up and give your heart to Him, and let's get out of here." Let's get out of here. And so everybody settles down, and the pastor settles everybody down, and I raised my hand. I said, "Look, I really appreciate it. This was nice. This was nice. You treated us really nice." I said, "But we got to go." And Gary Van Landingham said this to me: "Why are you afraid of knowing God?" And I said, "Well, I met him once, and it didn't work out."
And then
So
you started crying.
I started crying, and I said, I'm kind of like waiting for things to work out.
And that was 2 weeks before our wedding.
2 weeks before our wedding.
I now am thinking, oh, great.
Here we go again.
The wedding's off.
Out, Jezebel. Here we go again.
So
Brother
Abbott says to me, "What's holding you back from accepting Jesus?" And I started crying, and I said, "Because I asked him to get out of my life."
And how could he ever forgive me?
And he said, "He never got out of your life." And of course, I'm crying. And he put his hands under my face, and he just started praying. And he said, "Repeat after me." And I accepted the Lord. And then the next week we got married in the park.
It was 1974. And you guys got married. So you've been married for
47 years.
Yeah.
7 years.
Together 51.
Yeah.
Right. You had Jake and me in Ashland, and then me in Philly. And then
and the thing that stands with me, Matt, is that when people ask us our story about our marriage, about our faith, I say, well, I came to the Lord twice. The first time I came to the Lord without the word, it lasted 2 weeks. And I got my King James Bible from my brother with wide margins for notes. And I read the Bible hours a day. I've done that since. And people ask me, what's the difference? I said, the difference is I died within 2 weeks because I didn't have the word. And I've walked in with God for 47 years because I'm in the word. So that's the difference, was in the word.
And then we met Johnny Otto and all that. And Johnny became our father in the Lord and just discipled us and was there for us and actually became a father.
Yeah.
And he's still in our lives today.
I just quoted him recently in my sermon.
Yeah,
fix to fix you, so you'll be fixed.
That's true.
That was an unforgettable sermon of John.
Yeah, so the Lord provided a father for us and provided a whole family of believers, and really it was a little cocoon that we lived in for 7 years.
Yeah, and of course
had you and your brother, and that was also part of us having our lives be normalized.
But right away, I started having a conflict with, the more I read the Bible, the more I wanted to go back to New York and tell everybody I went to high school with about Yeshua. And then we ended up leaving there to go back to New York because we met Dr. Ray again and wanted to start Messianic synagogues so that there'd be a safe place for Jewish people to come to faith and live within a Jewish community. And that became our immediate vision, which we've been involved in now for 33 years.
And then trying to create a Jewish home. So that took some effort on my part as far as learning about Judaism, understanding the connection with the gospel, the Jewishness of Jesus, understanding where the traditions came in, and trying to make a home for you guys that would honor the Lord in that way, and that you would have a strong Jewish identity, you and your brothers. So
nailed it.
Yeah, well, it wasn't always easy because boys are boys, but
yeah,
but I did. And it really was me leaving my culture, and brought some things. You remember Pasta Shabbos, where we always had Italian food.
People ask me all the time, what's Jewish food like? And I say, I have no idea. My mom's Italian.
I tried. I make terrible matzo balls.
It's pasta.
But meatballs, like
pasta with butter and Parmesan cheese, is totally my comfort food.
Right. Exactly. Well, your mom's matzo balls could have been used by
last night.
Her matzo balls could have been used by King David to kill Goliath.
This is true, but the meatballs would have been good.
Yeah, the meatballs.
So joining our cultures together was, we tried to do some of that, but really and truly, the Jewishness of the gospel became the primary thing we wanted to do, to be a witness as a family, to have you guys
it became a magnificent obsession. How could there still be a thing called Christians without any who say our church goes back to this 2nd century, 3rd century, 1st century? And I said, why isn't there a synagogue that goes back to the 1st century followers of Yeshua? And that was the beginning of the seed that said, wait a minute, we're it. Yeah. We can restore.
I mean, my mother said the boys are going to be confused. They're not going to know who they are, because you either have to be Jewish or you have to be a Christian. They're going to be confused. And I said, no, the confusion is out there in the world that this is Jewish. Messiah is Jewish.
That was kind of our compass. Our due north of our hearts was to prove that it was possible to have a distinct Messianic Jewish community and be able to raise people in a Jewish faith that's firmly founded on the Messiah.
Shiva Israel was started initially because we wanted our children to have a home, a congregational home. So that was the first thought. And then, of course, to reach out to the rest of the Jewish world. And we started with 5 couples. On Long Island itself, there is the highest in the country of mixed marriages. Percentage is the highest, and
especially Catholic Jewish.
Jews and Catholics.
Yeah. So we kind of fit into the community without knowing it. So we have many mixed marriages in the congregation, but they also come because they want the Jewishness of the gospel in their families. And it brings, I don't want to say both faiths together, because it's not really an enmeshment of the two, but it's more
A
like
proper blend of
the,
the two.
yeah, a better representation.
Yeah.
For sure.
You know, I grew up in New York, and I still consider myself a New Yorker. In fact, I say to people, I'm a New Yorker in a Seattle exile. But when I moved out here to the Pacific Northwest 11 years ago, I was flying from San Diego to Seattle to find an apartment. And I was sitting in a window seat, and I looked out and saw Crater Lake. And very clearly, I heard the Lord say, "Welcome home." And I responded with, "I'm a New Yorker." But, you know, being here, being born in Ashland, Oregon, and where New York is my home in a lot of ways, and I still love the Yankees and the Islanders. It became clear to me that this was where I belonged. I was only here for 5 weeks before we moved to the East Coast.
Of course, your mom and I had our honeymoon at Crater Lake.
Yeah.
Right, which is why I'd heard about it my whole life, but I had never seen it. And when you're flying over it, it's quite obvious what it is. I never imagined that I would end up in Seattle or the West Coast, but in all different kinds of ways. I mean, even when, you know, you told Dad to come home, there's a weird, the Lord does really funny things to help us know where we're supposed to be. There are things that no person can plan. They happen and you go, "Oh, that's crazy." And I think that's part is usually his point, because he planned it that way from the beginning. So thanks for telling us your story. It's pretty remarkable. One of the things I understood from a young age from you is the importance of the Word of God in my life, that I have to read it and think about it and memorize it and let God speak to me through it. And I also got the idea of community, that it has to be more than just us, that God's created us to be in relationship with people. And I think I have always been an evangelist, because I want people to know God can change their lives, you know, as he did yours and mine. And so I think all those things are a part of the legacy of our family and the decision that you guys made to follow the Lord and change the trajectory of generations of our family.
Yeah.
So it's pretty amazing.
My whole life can be summed up in, I lasted in my relationship with God 2 weeks and died. I came back to God 3 years later and have been immersed in his word for 47 years. And that is what makes all difference between, what's the difference between, once someone once asked me, what's the difference between 2 weeks and falling away and walking with God for 47 years? What's the difference? I said, not in the word, in the word. That's the difference.